This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include political consultant from Eastern Carolina, Doug Raymond, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, and political consultant Brad Crone. I should mention Brad consults with Democrats and Doug with Republicans. Well, welcome to this special Easter edition of NC Spin. We feature this week's show a discussion about a drop in personal income taxes to the state, a legislative study committee report on teacher compensation, and Governor McCrory's nix on a deal for Dix property. And we close by asking our panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. We always wait for news about how personal income tax returns are going to affect the state's budget, especially since lawmakers are going to be convening for the short session on May 14th. Recently, they got some good news and some troubling news about tax collections. State tax collections are on target for the budget passed last year. That's the good news. But there's a warning signal, too. A recession-like drop in personal income tax collections has many worried. Unless tax returns for April 15th show a much healthier picture, personal income taxes are going to be about $250 million less than projected. Brad, the legislative staffers say this drop in personal income tax can be credited to changes that the lawmakers made in the withholding tax tables that started July 1st, but they also warn that it shows weaker than anticipated wage and salary growth in North Carolina. Just how big a problem is this?
Well, I don't think it's a big problem this year. I think it's a ripple effect to withholding. The big problem could come next year this time because you'll see the full implementation of the tax cut. I mean, people in 2015 will remit their individual income taxes for the previous year where the tax cuts took effect. And next year you could have a situation where you've got a $750 million shortfall or up to $1 billion shortfall if they don't see significant economic growth. And that will be a real pinch on the budget.
But Chris, isn't there some concern here about these personal income tax returns that are coming in? I mean, this weaker than anticipated growth in wages sounds problematic.
Well, it is. There's several things going on here. I think that it's too early to tell what exactly it is. I think part of the problem, you mentioned they changed the withholdings in July. I think there's some discussion that a lot of this will even itself out next year. But I'm starting to hear that there are economists who are worried that it won't, and that it reflects a weakness, that it's a combination of maybe a weak job market, maybe a weak personal income growth, and the effect of the tax cuts, which probably will be a bigger hit to the budget than we first realized. The big impact now is that what does it leave the General Assembly to do this year? They're going to have less money this year, whatever the long-term consequences are, and they have to make some big decisions that we've talked about on the show and we'll talk about later. Teacher pay primarily among them.
Yeah, Doug, Art Pope did an op-ed piece for the News and Observer this week, and he said basically he was touting what was going on. He said that the tax returns are indicating that it's working for working people in North Carolina. But it looks like it may be having some adverse effects as far as the state budget is concerned. Does that mean that lawmakers are going to have to do more cutting, cutting with agencies across the board?
Well, I think right now you got a couple things. First of all, April 15th deadline, they'll get a clearer picture after all the taxes are filed. But he talked about the working thing. I'm going to give you that Eastern North Carolina perspective. This is the first time that anybody can remember in the first 3 months of the year, Eastern North Carolina lost 11 working days due to weather. Now, when you think of all the outside construction, anybody that deals with anything outside, and then the storms, the power being out and everything, withholding is the biggest portion of those tax collection. When you get all those type of construction jobs and everything that they can't work, that's a big chunk of withholding that didn't go into the coffers.
John, what kind of message does it send that Governor McCrory sent out a message to all of the cabinet level people across the state? Stop spending money. Cut your budgets. Let's start saving money. Does that indicate he's worried about having enough at the end of the year, or enough for teacher pay raises?
I don't think they're worried about actually falling significantly below revenue projections. Remember, the revenue projections are on target. It's just the individual pieces of the tax picture, corporate sales and income, aren't performing exactly the same according to the projection. But the overall numbers right now are on target. They're not higher than target. It doesn't resolve various strains on the state budget, as has been pointed out. But this is simply too early to know. There was weakness in the payroll reports for January and February, but it doesn't track with the other data. So a lot of this needs to be watched carefully, but it's going to work itself out over the next few months, and then we'll know whether it's weather or just a change in withholding versus refunds in 2015 or something real.
The tax discussion takes another wrinkle in that legislators are talking now about limiting or capping the amount of privilege taxes that businesses are being charged across the state to $100 per business. Brad, the local communities ain't real happy about this, and it's several millions of dollars of revenues are going to be lost.
Yeah, no, and that's going to impact the League of Municipalities, in particular the local governments, as you said, Tom. So there is some concern there. Back to the governor's mandatory cut, though, or instructions to his department heads, his budget officers, I think that deals more with cash flow, Tom. And I think the state has been sweating cash flow for a long period of time, and the governor is acting proactive, is taking proactive steps at this time to do a better job on the cash flow management. And the idea is that a 3% or a 5% reduction on departmental spending will help them in that area. There's
a related point there we haven't mentioned yet, and that's Medicaid. It's been difficult to project in the past.
We still don't know about that.
They have some general sense of the overage, and there will be an overage, but the range of the overage is pretty large right now, and they don't have a lot of confidence in that number, so I think they feel like they'd rather be safe than sorry.
And all of this plays into, as Chris was mentioning, and we're going to talk about in a minute, teacher compensation and state employee compensation. Well, here's a programming note for our viewers in the Greensboro, Winston-Salem High Point market. In 2 weeks, NC Spin will no longer be broadcast over WFMY, but you can find us on Time Warner Cable on either Channel 65 or Channel 69 every Sunday at 9 a.m. Be sure to mark the new time and channel number. Oh, by the way, that's 10 a.m., not 9 a.m. And if you're a Time Warner subscriber, you can now find NC Spin at Time Warner On Demand or a cable system, a channel on your cable system. So go to our website, ncspin.com, to see the list of channels and times we air. By the way, Raleigh-Durham viewers are still going to find us at our regular times on WRAL and Fox 50. This is just in the Greensboro, Winston-Salem market. So be sure to set your DVR for either Time Warner, Sundays at 10, or get us on stream at www.ncspin.com. We want you to stay informed. When we come back, we're going to talk about teacher pay.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's important for farmers and hunters to work together. Farmers own a majority of North Carolina hunting land, and besides, we're often hunters too. We share the same North Carolina values that we'll pass on to future generations. We share the desire to enjoy the land and our leisure time. Together, we can respect the land, our natural resources, and our privacy.
Every year, North Carolina patients undergo 635,000 same-day surgeries. 72% of these surgeries are performed in our highest-cost hospital facilities, adding as much as $2,000 to every procedure. The state's outdated Certificate of Need law prevents competition from lower-cost, higher-quality same-day surgery centers, inflating healthcare costs and limiting patient choice. Tell state lawmakers it's time to lower healthcare costs now. It's time to make a simple fix to an outdated law, increasing patient choice and lowering healthcare costs now. You can help. Visit reformconnow.com and tell lawmakers it's time for a simple fix to an outdated law. It's time to lower healthcare costs now.
Meet the candidate that public policy polling has shown to have the best chance of defeating Kay Hagan this fall.
While mayor of Shelby, we cut the crime rate to its lowest rate in 30 years. We created jobs and economic opportunity in an otherwise stagnant economy. I plan to bring the same trust, experience, and determination as your U.S. Senator from North Carolina. I'm Ted Alexander, and I approve this message.
We now return to NC Spin.
The hue and cry to raise teacher pay was also hooked to the notion that we needed to find a better way to compensate our teachers. A task force was created by the General Assembly and asked to examine teacher compensation overall and come up with a plan for salaries that also rewarded the best teachers more. But the task force report was presented this past week, and it offered almost a dozen findings and 4 goals, but no specific plan. Doug, reaction to this report seems to be universal disappointment. Essentially, the conclusions were that the legislature should tell the State Board of Education to make the recommendation. What do you think about all this?
Well, I'm not going to dodge the question, but I've got a friend who's a county commissioner who says that school board budgets make his hair hurt, and task force reports make my hair hurt. But I found out something this week that I think is a very interesting approach on how they may deal with teacher pay. There may be something coming out of the Senate in the short session. Basically, there's $8 billion dedicated in state funds toward education. Only 47% of that goes to teachers. And there's some talk that there may be legislation come out that would require that 51% of that budget has to go to teachers. And when you're looking at an additional 4% of $8 billion, that's a huge chunk of money. And that could be a very innovative way to get teachers their raises.
Interesting. The legislature, we've talked about this before, Chris, the legislature seems intent on doing away with teacher tenure. And this practice, this task force, was supposed to be substituting tenure with a system that rewarded teachers who were excellent teachers and outstanding teachers. What's the big stumbling block with coming up with a compensation system like that?
I always remember, I think it was a couple of years ago when Senator Berger had a press conference and was announcing his first incarnation of the, I think still calls it the Excellent Schools Act or the Excellence in Public Schools Act. And he said, we looked all over the country to find a teacher performance pay plan that worked in another state and we were going to recommend it, but we couldn't find one. And that year he said, so we're going to let local school districts come up with it. Now we have a legislative committee who was charged with doing sort of a similar thing, and they didn't really even make a good stab at it. So there's a couple lessons here. First of all, and with all due respect to the folks on that commission, who I have some respect for, I think that commission was basically a joke and a waste of time. We have the findings we could talk about on the show. They really didn't do anything except raise expectations and then not deliver. But I think it speaks to how difficult it is. It's easy to rhetorically say we need to pay teachers better who are performing better, but nobody has a really good idea yet about how to do that. And I think we've just seen that again.
Yeah. Brad, one of the co-chairs of this committee that Chris was talking about was Jerry Tillman, and he says that teacher pay has been sacrificed at the expense of funding the teacher and state employees' retirement system, nearly 100%. First of all, do you think that is accurate? Teacher pay raises have been substituted for that. And secondly, if that's the case, what does it say?
Well, I don't know if the statement is completely accurate. I do respect Chairman Tillman and the work that he's done on the Education Committee in the Senate. I would say that you've got to have linkage between your retirement, between your funding and your pay schedule, and you've got to look at the benefits. It's amazing to me, I've heard a lot of dialogue over the last week about teachers in North Carolina working a 9-month schedule, not working an annual schedule. And if we're going to increase incrementally their pay raises, then we ought to look at an annual schedule. So there is a whole lot of dialogue out there. Also interesting enough, a lot of discussion about how you rank the teacher pay. I think it's fundamentally important, if you're going to pay your teachers, you got to fund the retirement system for them.
John, just to dovetail on my earlier question, and the earlier topic that we had, the anticipated problems in tax receipts coming into the state has some legislative leaders saying that teacher pay increases may be once again sacrificed at the altar because of budget problems. What do you think?
That's not what they said. That there was a discussion
about... That's what I read that they said.
Well, but what you read is not what they said.
Okay.
All right? So what
Wait a minute,
you're
telling me that the news media may have been inaccurate?
There may have been some inaccurate or misleading reporting going on. There is absolutely no question that they're going to do a teacher pay increase in 2014. It's just a question of exactly what and when and how much. That's the issue. They're almost certainly going to
over and above the starting teacher pay.
Well, that's what I was going to say. They're certainly going to raise starting teacher pay, and that is going to be a multi-year process that begins in 2014. I also think there is still going to be substantial support in the legislature for an across-the-board pay increase, even if it's not super large in 2014. Again, it'll be a multi-year plan. As far as the teacher pay and performance issue is concerned, the task force had 4 meetings. They took some testimony. That was fine. But to expect a task force in 4 meetings to come up with a specific plan for every school district is silly. They shouldn't be dictating this from Raleigh. This is something that Guilford County and Mooresville City and New Hanover, they should all be coming up with plans of their own. That is absolutely what the legislature authorized. And as you look across the country and across the world, you will find that some teacher incentive programs fail, typically because
So this was a fool's errand to start off with.
No,
so why did the legislature form this committee?
It's not a fool's errand. The legislative committee gathered some information that everybody can read, but it was never intended to come up with a specific teacher pay plan, and it didn't do that, and that was it.
Certainly didn't.
Well, and I think there's a lot of discussion. I think John's right in the sense that, and Tillman's right in the sense, as we look at compensation for teachers, the marketplace is changing on defined benefits in your retirement system.
Well, and that's another issue that we need.
Issue.
Yeah, we need to get into. But there's one thing, Chris, I wanted to ask you and follow up on this. Okay, so this plan is recommending that we turn over to the State Board of Education the task of developing a teacher compensation system. Now, these are political appointees over there with the State Board of Education. Do we have a lot of confidence in that?
I mean, they're the governor's appointees for the most part, and I guess the idea being the governor has a big say in education. I want to get to one point about paying for these teacher pay raises, however large they are and whoever gets them. There's been a lot of discussion that the $360 million the General Assembly set aside last year, not put in the rainy day fund, just didn't spend, could be used for these raises. The problem is that's one-time money. And we've talked about many times on this show, you can't pay ongoing salary increases with one-time money. Republicans know that because they complained about it when the Democrats did.
And we still don't know what the Medicaid problem is going to be.
They could use that one-time money for bonuses. If that's what they end up going for, it would be one-time expenditure.
All right, after these messages, we're going to have to take a break. After these messages, we're going to talk about McCrory's Nix on Dix.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's a contract between generations, between father and son, mother and daughter, that each will take care of the next. Keith Crisco knows firsthand that millions of Americans rely on Social Security and Medicare. That's why in Congress he'll protect these life-saving programs for our seniors and for generations to come. It's a promise we've made to each other, and it's the right thing to do.
I'm Keith Crisco, and I approve this message.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce health care costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in health care matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our health care investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at OurNCHealthcare.com.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
1 in 5 North Carolinians can't buy healthy foods in their communities, increasing their risk of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and some forms of cancer. Learn more at accesshealthyfoodsnc.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
What to do with the Dorothea Dix property in downtown Raleigh is an ongoing saga that just doesn't seem to end. You might remember Governor Perdue struck a deal with the city of Raleigh to lease the property, but legislators and incoming Governor McCrory said it wasn't a good deal for state taxpayers and nixed it. The city came back with another offer to purchase the property for $38 million. But again, Governor McCrory said this was a bad deal for our state. He countered with an offer to sell 244 of the 308 acres to the city for $52 million and keep the 64 acres currently being used by the Department of Health and Human Services. John, the governor says the state will sell Dix, but only for fair market value. What do you think of his counteroffer?
I think it is more reasonable than the city's original offer, but I think they will end up meeting somewhere in the middle. If you look at the city's offer, you've got to remember it wasn't just the sticker price. Then they were going to subtract from that a range of expenses associated with what they expected to be remediation of environmental problems with the site in order to turn it into a park. And so the real offer from the city was something like $88,000 an acre if you subtract the remediation. The governor's proposal was something more like $215,000 an acre. So between $88,000 and $215,000, there's some meeting in the middle there that's probably going to happen. The city seemed to think they could get it for a song. That the actual proposal they made was, if you work the math, not all that different from Governor Perdue's original deal that the legislature didn't like. So I think they started low. I think that the state has started high, and they're going to haggle their way to a number, and I think you're going to end up with the Dix Park.
Brad, what do you think of this concept, though, of keeping the 64 acres that DHHS is currently using, the old Dix Hospital site, and not selling it so that the state employees? Governor McCrory says it's just too expensive to move the thousands of employees out of there.
Well, it certainly is, and it provides an area for state government in the future to grow. Right now, the state government complex down Halifax Street is all taken up with state office buildings. So it provides opportunity for proper growth for state government well into the future.
Now, Chris, a lot of people are saying they wanted the whole 306 or 308 acres. Mm-hmm. Could the city actually do what they wanted to do in building a park with 244 acres? That's prime Raleigh land.
Well, first of all, it's interesting to me that Governor McCrory is leaving room to grow state government, would be the first thing I would say, with land on Dorothea Dix property for more state employees. But look, there's going to be a park. It looks like there's going to be a deal. It's going to be halfway, somewhere in between. I think the big issue is I'm not sure we know yet the extent of the environmental remediation and how much that costs. That's the real hot potato. We can come to numbers on these other things. I'm not sure yet they know what's in the ground.
Doug,
that they have to fix.
What's a more likely number? It ain't going to be 38 and it's not going to be 52. What do you think is a more likely number?
I'm with John. It's somewhere in the middle. But I'll tell you one thing is the deal with not the building there. I've seen this happen a lot of places on the county level. A lot of times when you buy an old building like that, when it's being used, it's fine. But once you empty it out, it is so problematic it becomes a money pit. So it might be a good deal for Raleigh not to take the building and just take the land.
All right. After these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The physician-patient relationship is at the heart of what medicine is about. And so to have a third party telling you, the physician, or you, the patient, where you can have a test, where you can have surgery, or whether you can or cannot, seems completely outside of the realm of reasonable thinking. It's getting a third party who has no business telling us and the patients where to go out of the mix, directly increasing competition, which does nothing but benefit the patient. I'm Dr. Mack Aldridge, and I support CON reform now.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
NCAnimalag.com.
Time for one of our favorite parts of the show, when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something.
Among the appointments Governor McCrory made recently were new appointments to something called the Human Relations Commission, which doesn't have a huge role, but is a very symbolic thing to a lot of people. Two of the appointees were very strident supporters of the Marriage Discrimination Amendment. One is a fill-in conservative radio talk show host. That is not making folks happy as we try to heal up and become a more accepting state.
Doug, tell us something we don't know.
There may be a movement in the short session to actually do away with the pistol permitting process that the state has. That's going to make conservative happy, but I think sheriffs on both sides of the aisle aren't going to like it.
Brad, tell us something we don't know.
ProPublica's working on a story in North Carolina, as much as $1.1 million in television advertising in Raleigh, Greensboro, and Charlotte going against Republican legislators and the governor.
John.
State Senator Malcolm Graham from the Charlotte area has just gotten a boost in his campaign in the 12th Congressional District, the Democratic primary, which is the general. The other major Charlotte candidate, James Mitchell, just dropped out, and that should help Malcolm Graham do well in that Charlotte-oriented congressional district.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our column. Be sure to visit the website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Hope you'll join us next week when we've got a Democrat and a Republican campaign consultant talking about the elections and the upcoming short session. Till then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.